You hear the screeching of an owl, you hear the wind begin to howl. You know there's zombies on the prowl, and it's terror time again. They've got you running through the night. It's terror time again, and you just might die of fright. It's a terrifying time.
The mundanity of life before the end times. What did you do in life? What were you good at? Well, using that role in society, you'll start off the apocalypse with knowledge and training in several different skill points. But first, let's discuss the difference between a profession and a trait. Your profession is the job you had from before. It determines a majority of your starting skills and even some traits, as some professions have unique traits only found on that job. A trait, however, is a positive or a negative modifier of a character. Maybe you played baseball as a hobby, and as such you were good at hitting things with bats and other long weapons. Maybe you were a klutz and stumble around attracting unwanted attention. Each trait and profession has a certain skill point cost associated with it. Some professions like unemployed and carpenter start with a positive point modifier, so you can afford to take some positive traits without some negative. Some like veteran though, with really powerful unique traits, require you to take some negatives to balance it out. The points when you create a character must be 0 or positive. You can have points left over, but you cannot have negative points. Also, another thing that is relevant to your profession, depending on which profession you choose, you get a different pool of spawning houses based on each region. Each region has certain spawn houses that are allocated more heavily towards certain professions. Unemployed, you're more likely to get a trailer or some other shitty house. So that's a fun little feature. Here I'm going to discuss some of my overall preferred jobs and why I think they're solid choices for my playstyle. Here is a basic but solid choice for the base building oriented, that being carpenter. You start with a big old pile of carpentry levels and one level of short blunt. This is great for getting a base off the ground quickly, especially as you'll level your carpentry much faster even without the aid of books. Not always the best for a solo player, but for a group, a dedicated builder could be essential to weathering out the horde, especially in a helicopter event. Even for a solo player, it is decent though, as it has a level of short blunt, giving you an edge in a very common category. Construction worker is the exact opposite of carpenter. It gives you a slight edge in carpentry, but a really solid edge in short blunt combat. It does require you to take at least 2 negative points, but with 3 levels of short blunt, it could be a very solid choice for a combat-oriented player, and it still gives you that carpentry boost as well. Repairman is the middle ground between these two. A small boost to carpentry and short blunt, but a moderate boost to maintenance. This ultimately could be more powerful for a late game survivor, because it'll ensure your weapons last much longer, keeping you in the fight more effectively, and not relying on weapons more likely to bite you literally in the ass. This also leads to it having a higher cost, but personally it's often worth it for me. My next pick is a double pick. Fire Officer and Lumberjack. They both specialize in axes, but in different ways. Fire Officer gives you a flat 1 to your axes, but it also backs it up with a boost to sprinting, fitness, and strength, letting you run faster, hit harder, and run longer. While Lumberjack goes full in on the axe specialization, giving you 2 points in the axe skill and a special trait that lets you cut down trees faster, as well as swing faster in combat. Fire Officer is better in my opinion for the defensive focused player, giving you more fleeing options, while Lumberjack is excellent for that offense focused player who just wants to stand their ground and fight off the horde. The next 2 professions are less combat focused but have a plethora of benefits. The second one being great for stealth, but let's discuss the Park Ranger first. It does start with a +1 in axe, which is already a solid bonus, but it also has a +1 in carpentry and 2 points in foraging and trapping, giving this player a solid boost if you have to survive in a woodlands environment. It's definitely kept me alive plenty of times, as I have to flee to McCoy on challenge runs often. I would have starved to death if it wasn't for the plentiful supply of berries. It will cost you at least just 4 points, but it's often worth it. Now, Burglar is another solid choice for the player who is focused less on combat and more on getting in and out with as little attention as possible. Starting with a +2 in light-footed, sneaking, and nimble, you're already much more acrobatic than many later game characters. Coupled with the profession's unique traits of being able to more reliably pop open windows and the ability to hotwire cars right from the get-go, and you've got a build just ready to flee town. Now, this one does have some of the higher point cost at 6 points though. So plan your negative traits accordingly and try to not take something like, say, clumsy, which will weaken the effectiveness of why you took that profession. Many of the other professions can be worthwhile choices in the right situations, but I find are less effective for the single player. I'm much more likely to recommend them in a group setting, where each player can tailor a build to a specific role, such as Doctor being used by the team medic so they can more effectively treat those around them, Farmer being used by the guy who stays back at base and tends the fields, making sure the group has effective supplies late into the winter. Now that I've got some of my preferred picks for professions, let's discuss traits. To reiterate, a trait is a positive or negative modifier that affects what a player can do, or what they start better at and have a permanent XP bonus towards. I'll be picking several positive and negative traits as to keep the list balanced. Let's start with 5 positive traits. At 10 points, Strength is a costly one, but it grants extra carrying capacity as well as extra knockback with your melee weapons, so you can more effectively keep those undead shitbags away from your fleshy bits. Now, the Herbalist may seem like a strange pick, but given how hard it is to find the right book sometimes, this little trait can quickly become one of the most important, especially on a foraging-based character. I often pair it with Park Ranger, who will need to survive off berries. Handy is also another one of those traits I personally value more than others due to it offering a carpentry and maintenance bonus. However, this one is pretty costly at 8 points, and as such can be harder to justify for many players. Lucky is a cheap and reliable perk. What does it do? It boosts your percentage chance of finding more valuable loot overall. And my final pick for a solid positive trait, Fast Learner. Being able to boost every single stat gain by 25% is an excellent boost, letting some characters gain up to 150% boost on a skill total, which can be extremely helpful in some of those harder to grind skills such as electrical. Now let's take a look at 5 character traits that, while negative, can be seen as an easy way to balance out the point detriment. First up is Smoker. This one is almost a no-brainer. Basically, you have to smoke around 1 cigarette a day to keep your stress and withdrawals down. It's almost essentially a free 4 points with how common cigarettes and lighters tend to be. High Thirst is another one that can be easily managed or outright negated. It causes you to drain water at a heightened rate than usual. Sounds bad until you realize that water is pretty easily managed, either via keeping on top of water sources or just moving to a part of the map with a well and setting up shop there. An easy source of 6 points. Weak Stomach is another one that's almost a no-brainer. As long as you're not eating rotten foods, you shouldn't suffer the consequences of this trait at all. And with a high cooking skill, you can completely negate that risk too, by being able to incorporate rotten foods into your cooking. Another easy 3 points. Pacifist can also be seen as an easy source of points if you're willing to lose out on some XP. Unlike what it implies, it doesn't actually make you fight worse. It just slows your XP gains by 25% for combat-related skills. And this trait can also be balanced out via Fast Learner. The last one I almost always take is Sleepyhead. This one makes you require more sleep to effectively keep energized, a need fulfilled pretty easily in most situations. Now let's discuss the character creation screen for appearance. This actually does have an impact on how your character will begin. Each profession has access to different outfits to start the game, as well as the generic basic clothes. Even with the basic sets, however, there is some choices that affect your character. For instance, the more layers you have on, the faster you'll overheat, the more you'll sweat. You can choose between, say, running shoes, which let you run faster, but this costs you protection on your feet, and regular shoes, which run slower but protect your feet better. And for professions such as say fire officer, you could start with things like firefighter pants and military boots, which has some really high protection values. But these clothes will also make you sweat and slow down more respectively. I hope this guide on the character creation within Project Zomboid has been useful and informative to you. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Please subscribe if you haven't, and if you enjoyed it. This has been Core, and I'll see you next time.